Good afternoon, everybody. I welcome you all to today's session of the 8th chapter of the NABH entry-level series, which deals with facility management and safety. Today, we have a very renowned speaker, Mrs. Sudha Srinivasan, who started off humble as a medical record technician, but went on to become the CEO and senior consultant of her own venture, which is Amaya Consultants. She has a wide experience in various multi-specialty hospitals based out of Chennai, like the Dr. Mehta's Hospital, SIMS hospitals, and even Apollo hospitals. And today she's a very notable speaker and a very renowned consultant of NABH. So welcome you, Maggie, for joining us today. I will leave it to you to start the session.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Doctor. Very good afternoon to all of you. My heartfelt thanks to CAHO leadership for having chosen me for this particular topic today. As we all know, this is going to be only for the entry-level standards. We are going to discuss about the entry-level standards pertaining to the 8th chapter of the 10 chapters in the NABH, which is the Facility Management and Safety. Going on, we'll call it as FMS, right? So before we talk about the standards and objective elements, we need to understand that of late, of the experience that we recently had in a few of the hospitals, on the NABH assessment part in the entry level, there are a lot of focus given in terms and importance given to this particular chapter when it comes to assessment. And even without assessment, it is very important for us to focus on this primary area, because every chapter is important, of course, but this primarily deals with a lot of safety aspects covering all the areas in the hospital. So when we talk about the FMS chapter in entry-level standards, we have 4 standards and 15 objective elements. FMS 1 talks about safe environment. It covers 5 objective elements. FMS 2 talks about the equipment management with 2 objective elements. FMS 3 talks about the safe facilities and the alternate facilities available with adequate backups, covering 3 objective elements. And FMS 4 talks about the fire and non-fire emergencies. So before we discuss about any chapter, it is important for us to understand the intent of why this particular objective element or standard has been laid down as part of the NABH. Without that, it is definitely going to be very difficult for anybody to implement. And of course, this is a very big topic as such, and it is definitely difficult for us to cover within the next 30 minutes, but I will try to cover as much as possible. Right? The intent of this entire chapter is to make sure that provisions for a safe and secure environment of not only just patients, the visitors, and as well as the staff working in the hospital is being ensured. The plans for plans for handling emergencies, not just the fire, even the non-fire emergencies within the facilities and the community. This is another area, a broader area that needs to be looked at. And also the intent is to create a program as such for managing the clinical and support service equipment. So this is another broader, these are the 3 major things that are covered as part of the FMS entry-level standards. So FMS 1 says the organization's environment and facilities operate to ensure safety of patients, their families, staff, and visitors. So it's very, very clearly given. So it talks about the environment, it talks about the facilities to operate, facilities that operates to ensure the entire group of people who walk in and out every day inside the hospital. So let's talk about the objective elements in FMS 1. FMS 1A says internal and external signages shall be displayed in a language understood by the patients and families. It's very, very self-explanatory, isn't it? Now, we have been talking about the signage right from chapter 1, right from AAC 1C talks about the clear display of the scope of services in the hospital. There are many other chapters you would have gone through so far, talking about, the different signage requirement. It could be the obstetric high risk obstetric service display, or the pediatric service display. It could be various other information signages like the caution signage when it comes to the radiation safety, or it could be the biohazard display or the biomedical waste management poster. There are different requirements as such in different departments. So when we actually look at in a broader perspective regarding the signage, what is a signage? It is a design, or it is a sign or a symbol of communication to guide the patients in the right manner. Right? It could be for, in terms of the direction, it could be in terms of information or instruction, or sometimes it could be statutory. Right? What we need to very clearly note down is any signage has to be bilingual. That is mandatory. So any signage should be definitely in English, and apart from that, it should be covered in the local regional language. If your hospital caters to different parts of, patients from different parts of the country or from the world, so based on the number of patients who walk into your hospital, you can design and, display it in different multiple other languages as well. Also, displaying it pictorically would be a very good, it's always preferable, if not mandatory, but bilingual is definitely required. So when we talk about the types of signages, there are 4 types of signage. One is the statutory signage, where we cannot fail. Right? It could be the state specific or the nation specific. There are a lot of statutory signages, like for example, we have the emergency exit boards to be displayed, which is as part of the National Building Code. Very clearly says this should be the size of the board. This should be the the color of the board. Whether it should be a reflector board, where all it should be displayed. Right? So it's very clearly given in by the various authorities, and these should be abided. The other few examples could be the AERB guidelines, which very clearly talks about the caution signages, radiation, radiation protection signages. You have some other examples like the PCP and DT. We have the information posters on the biomedical waste management rules to be displayed. So here there are certain things which are given in specific sizes, specific color, and specific content as such. We cannot modify or customize to our own convenience. So this has to be listed out, and we need to display it properly. The next would be the identification signage, which is self-explanatory. When you want to identify a particular department or a particular area, then we call it as the identification signage. It could be the department signage, or so that is again important. The background color could be your branding color. The next would be the information signage, where you try to give some information to the people who walk in and walk out of your hospital. It could be like, it could be your PPE instruction signage, or it could be the visitor control policy. It could be the patient rights and responsibilities, whether management is not responsible for the belongings. All these are information signages that you want to convey to people. It could be staff or a visitor or a patient. So such signages comes under the information. So that becomes the third one. The last one is about the direction signage, which clearly gives the direction on direction on how to lead to a particular department. These are very important floor wise, especially when the patients or the visitors step out of the lift, or near the staircases, where you try to help the patients on showing the directions of the various departments. So the crux of the entire signage part is that it has to be in specific sizes if given by different authorities. It should be in specific colors. It should be very user friendly. It could be sometimes confusing also. Say for example, the fire exit boards, we normally tend to show the direction arrows as well as the pictorial ones. Sometimes it could be misleading. So the person who is going to handle the signage has to do it very carefully, right? So this is about the signage. Going back to FMS 1B, it says maintenance staff is contactable round the clock for emergency repairs. So we have to be very careful when we are reading through the standards. So we are not talking about the 3-tier, the metropolitan city hospitals, where you have round the clock people to handle such emergency. This entry level is primarily also to focus on hospitals which are in the rural setups, where you hardly find any qualified maintenance person available round the clock. Maybe it is a small nursing home kind of a setup where we cannot expect round the clock maintenance staff to be available, which is why the standard very clearly says maintenance staff is contactable round the clock for any emergency repairs. Here, if your hospital is big enough, you can engage somebody within your hospital, or you can even outsource a person who will be able to, whom you can reach out even at odd hours, and the person would be able to come and repair or rectify the problem within a certain turnaround time. So here we need to make sure that we maintain a proper complaints register, where you note down when was the complaint raised and when did the person actually come and address it. By doing this, it helps us by and large to plan out our equipments for backup and also to plan out for manpower, so that you have an uninterrupted patient care in your hospital. FMS 1C talks about the identification of the potential safety and security risk, including the hazardous material. Basically, we are trying to cover the HIRA, right? The hospital hazard identification and risk assessment. Why do we need to do this? So can we not copy paste from any other hospital? Typically not, because the kind of setup that each hospital will have, even if it is going to be its own branch, it's going to be different. The infrastructure is going to be different. The kind of scope of services that you are going to provide in each of your branch is going to be different. So it is very, very specific to your hospital. All you have to do is, we will have to identify the various possible risks within the hospital in different care settings. It could be, the hazards could be classified into multiple things. It could be an infrastructural hazard, it could be a fire hazard, it could be a chemical hazard, it could be an infection hazard, it could be multiple other things. So is it possible for one person to identify all these things? Definitely not. If it's a bigger hospital, if you have a bigger team, you can apportion it to different groups. Say, for example, you can apportion the infection control risk assessment part to the infection team or the infection control nurse who's available in your hospital. Probably you can ask the maintenance person or your fire safety officer or the person who's in charge of the admin who looks out the entire fire safety aspect and the maintenance part of your hospital to identify hazards relating to the infrastructure and fire hazard. So like this, you can try and distribute. You will have a radiation safety person who can handle the radiation related risk assessment. So by doing this, you are equally sharing the responsibilities, and you're technically assigning to the right people to identify the risk. So it is very, very important for us to identify the risk. So when you identify the risk, we need to also put in place the process on how you can prevent these risks from happening. So defining protocols is very, very important once you identify the risk. Once you have identified the protocols, make sure that you have adequate resources provided to prevent such risk from happening. I'll give an example. Say, for example, when you go across the wards, probably then the needle stick injury is one of the risks for any nurse or a housekeeping person. So you have identified the risk. So you need to clearly write down a protocol on how would you prevent a needle stick injury from happening. Right? Once you've done that, we need to also make sure that if there are resources that are required. So for example, they need to have an injection tray with them to carry the injection so that they don't carry it bare hand. In that case, it is the responsibility of the team to ensure that adequate resources are also provided to the people so that such risk does not happen. Okay, once protocols are defined, you have identified the risk, you have defined the protocols, you have given the resources. Please train your people in the hospital. It is very, very important that relevant risk are trained to appropriate people. Meaning, we need not train about all the risk in the hospital to everybody in the hospital, isn't it? What is pertaining to people working in wards? What is relevant? Say, for example, if you take the same example, the needle stick injury. Everybody in the hospital need not know about the needle stick injury, right? So, but if you take the fire hazard, everybody in the hospital should know how to operate an extinguisher. So, you also try to start training people on these protocols that you have beautifully defined. Beyond that, there could be certain incidents, there could be certain times where some incidents happen. So there should be a mechanism to report such incidents, and the protocol should very clearly define on whom to report as well. It need not be the same person, it could be different people. You would have already seen in ROM chapter about whom to report, the safety officer, and the need for a person, designated person to report to regarding the incident reporting. So it could again be, see, it could again be decentralized. For example, if it is a needle stick injury, it could be reported to the HIC nurse. If it's a fire hazard, so incident reporting also, to whom you have to report, has to be very, very clearly spelled out in the protocols that you have defined. So periodic identification of risk, periodic upgradation of your protocols, provision of resources accordingly, training your people, reporting of risk, again taking corrective preventive actions, again redoing the protocols. It's always a continuous process. So it's very important for any hospital, irrespective of whether it's a small hospital or a bigger hospital, to start identifying hazard identification, start identifying the hazards and doing the risk assessment. So how do we do it? Can we do it that easily? So which is why a facility safety round is very, very important, which is given your FMS 1B talks about facility inspection rounds to ensure safety are conducted periodically. See here, the hazard identification, for us to do the hazard identification and risk assessment, facility inspection rounds could be one of the biggest opportunity or biggest methodology to do that activity. Once you do that, you again start identifying, you start creating a proper training schedule for relevant staff, and make sure that people who know about the subject take the different classes, right? Again, when we talk about the classes, when we talk about the training programs, it is not the typical traditional method of doing a training program. It is important for us to understand that people who cannot understand the PPTs, maybe you have people from your staff from the security or from housekeeping who will not be able to read the read English, or may not be able to follow the PowerPoint presentations that we put in the auditorium. So for that, you have to adopt different methodologies to make sure that you train them. So making it user friendly is as important as just giving a training. So what all should be documented? As Lalu ma'am rightly already pointed out in the first chapter, in entry level, it is very important that we have the major manual called the Apex manual, which contains all the policies and procedures of the hospital. So whatever protocols that we are defining in a hospital should be as part of the Apex manual. It's also important for us to maintain the complaints register and the minutes, and the incident reporting and the timelines, the corrective preventive actions, whatever we are taking, all these should be documented very, very clearly. These will be definitely asked at the time of assessment. Going to FMS 2, the organization has a program for clinical and support service equipment management. Right, it talks about the biomedical equipments as well as the support service equipment. The organization plans for equipment in accordance with its services. Going back to AAC1, the hospital very clearly needs to define the scope of service. When we say defining the scope of service, it talks automatically about the people who are going to take care of such patients, meaning whether you have the specialist available round the clock to cater to OP, IP, and emergency patients. Parallelly, you also need to ensure that appropriate, adequate equipments are available to cater to such patients, right? So when you go for the assessment, when you go for application for the entry level, the moment you click on a particular scope of service, say for example, cardiology or obstetrics, it would ask for the specialist available. Parallelly, it would also ask you to list out what are the different equipments available in your hospital pertaining to that particular specialty. If we do not have, right, if we do not have, are we going to outsource? Say for example, if your hospital has a trauma if your hospital is a trauma center, whether you have a CT and MR in place, if your hospital is an obstetric, hospital, whether you have the basic CTG monitors and, what is required for the labor ward, all these should be very, very clearly spelled out as part of your Apex manual. Your asset list has to be very, very robust. Whatever equipments that you have, be it the biomedical equipment or the support service equipment, it has to be very clearly spelled out as part of your Apex panel. If you're, or it could also be a standalone document. The biomedical department and the electrical department should maintain the complete list of the assets along with the asset codes. Right? There is no standard template for defining an asset code. It is it is very, very hospital specific. You can define on your own. It could be equipment based, or it could be department wise also. But you need to very clearly have the asset code, because it is important for us to trace back the equipment in case of a failure, or if you want to condemn, or if you want to replace. Right? Make sure that every equipment has an asset code stuck on it. Apart from the asset code, it also needs to very clearly talk about when was the last preventive maintenance done, when was the last calibration done, if that equipment requires calibration, and what is the next due for the PM and calibration. These things are very, very basic for every equipment inside your hospital. So once you do that, once you have arrived at the asset list, then the next step would be preparing the preventive maintenance schedule and the calibration schedule. There are three main things that you need to remember. See, there is a documented operational and maintenance plan for the hospital. It's not only for the biomedical equipment, it's for the support service equipment also. What is preventive maintenance? It is an activity which is done at predetermined intervals intended to reduce the probability of failure. You do it even before something goes wrong. Right? It is very, very important. So when it comes to a hospital, there are you will definitely have so many equipments, and unless we plan for it periodically, it's never going to happen. So it is very important for us to have a preventive maintenance schedule and a calibration schedule for those equipments which requires calibration. Apart from that, there also needs to be a system in place to ensure the breakdown maintenance. What is the breakdown maintenance? The moment there is a repair, there is a process automatically to escalate. There is a person who can come and attend within a stipulated time. There is a TAT measure. And meanwhile, whether the patient is going to suffer, or you have some backup equipment, or if you cannot have a backup equipment, are you going to shift the patient to the nearest site? This plan has to be very, very clearly available in the hospital. Right? Then what is an operational plan? It is to ensure that the equipment is used or operated by the technician or by the user as per the instructions of the manufacturer. So it's nothing but your SOP listed out and made available next to your equipments available inside the hospital. It has to be definitely as per the manufacturer's recommendations. So the same ventilator could have multiple models, and the operating methodology could be different for each. So each of these, maybe you have a new nurse who does not know to operate. In case of an emergency, if she has to operate, there has to be a operating manual, the list of protocols available next to the equipment, isn't it? And apart from that, there also has to be a periodic check of all these critical equipments. We understand that every day all the equipments may not be, it's not possible to check, but at least critical equipments have to be checked on daily basis or on a periodic basis to ensure it functions properly and it does not hinder any of the patient care. Right? With that, we need to understand that equipment availability is very, very important. If something goes wrong, there has to be a backup equipment, or in the worst case, we need to at least outsource, or we should be able to transfer the patient to the nearest facility which is accredited, and an MOU also needs to be established. Maintaining an inventory of the entire set of equipment. When was it installed? Whether you have given it for AMC, you are going to do the preventive maintenance in-house, or you are going to outsource it. What is the frequency? How frequently do you remind them? Whether you have collected the reports from them, all these are very, very important. So all these documentation has to be properly maintained by the respective departments. Document list of equipments in the Apex manual as already indicated. Handling and operation, make sure that it is done as per the manufacturer's instruction. Train your staff on handling whenever there is a new equipment introduced or whenever there is new entrant who's joined high risk areas or any specific department. Training, proper training has to be given to that particular staff so that handling is done in a proper manner. Provide operator with a list of operating instructions as already indicated, and make sure that they also have the person to whom they have to contact in case of any failure. These should be available in the respective areas. Preventive maintenance, we've already talked about it. Planned preventive maintenance is very important. Maintaining its records is important. Making sure that equipments which require calibration needs to be calibrated in a periodic fashion, and all these documents are to be maintained properly. If you're going to do the calibration in-house, it is fine, but as long as you have the standard equipment available in your hospital and you have the traceability certificate of those, then you can do it in-house. Otherwise, it is better that you outsource your calibration activity. Breakdown maintenance, we have talked about it. FMS 3, the organization has provisions for safe water, electricity, medical gas, and vacuum pumps. Very important. FMS 3A says potable water and electricity are available round the clock. What is potable water? Anything that is usable, right, inside the hospital. And electricity. So how do we plan for water? At least the water, when it comes to water, at least for the next 2 days at any point of time, we should have sufficed water. So a proper calculation must be done on what is the requirement. If it's going to be full occupancy, half occupancy, what is on an average, how much does our hospital consume in different seasons? That also needs to be considered, right? At least for 48 hours, water availability, potable water availability should be there. And electricity, again, maybe the hospital was planned 10 years ago, and you would have started with a small setup, and probably you are trying to expand the number of ICU beds, or you are trying to have a few more operation theaters. Accordingly, you also need to plan for the electrical supply, power requirements. All these also you have to start planning. FMS 3B says alternate sources are provided for in case of failure and tested regularly. See, in case of failure, you have planned for electricity, you are making sure that potable water is available from the main source. What if those fail? Do you have alternate sources to so that you don't have an interrupted patient care? So again, in those alternate sources, whether you test regularly, what if that also fails? So there are multiple checks and controls expected in according to the standards in terms of electricity, the water, and the medical gas supply. FMS 3C says there is a maintenance plan for medical gas and vacuum pumps. Talk about it in detail. Water management. So there has to be definitely any hospital will have one main source of water. It could be a well, it could be a supplier tanker, or it could be a bore water, a metro water, whatever it is. So apart from that, even if it is going to be surplus, it is always a good practice to identify an alternate source apart from your main source. That is very important. Identification of the average consumption in your hospital is to be calculated and arrived at. Okay, once you do that, you also need to identify the different tanks and sumps available in your hospital. Tanks here, I mean the overhead tanks. If you have, maybe you have different tanks for storing different types of water. One could be for drinking water, one could be an RO water, one could be for fire, fire pipelines. So it could be different. So what has to be done is you have to clearly label. It has to be clearly labeled on the type of water it actually contains. Okay, apart from that, you also need to mention the volume, the last cleaning date, and the next due date for cleaning, right? The also we need to fit the water level indicator so that we try to refill the water as frequently as possible, and we don't drain it out completely. There are color code for plumbing lines available as per the National Building Code. Few of the examples: red for fire pipelines, often we find it in red. For recycled water, it could be in green. There are a lot of guidelines available as part of the National Building Code. And how frequently are we supposed to clean these tanks? At least once in 3 months. That doesn't stop us from cleaning every month. It again depends on the requirement. It depends on the type of water that you actually receive from your main source. Based on it could be a different practice in different hospital, but not but definitely once in 3 months at least the tanks have to be cleaned. There has to be proper protocol for that as well. Many times when we look at the water tanks, often it is not accessible. You will find the overhead tanks above some building, but when we ask them, they will say that yes, we do it, we clean it every month, but when we actually go and see that, we will not be able to find any ladder or any access to that. Then how do we actually go and climb? So we can't put the people who are going to clean there at risk as well. So adequate safety measures have to be ensured for people who are going to clean, and they should be taught on how to actually clean the water tanks as well. And coming to the culture, every month biological testing has to be done at random source, right? And chemical analysis at least once in 6 months. For if your hospital has a dialysis department, endotoxin levels have to be tested every month. These are bare minimum things that we need to be doing when we are going for entry level standards, right? Electricity maintenance, so making sure that it is not cluttered. Often most of our hospitals, we see a lot of scrap, lot of old tube lights or chokes. All these often lie in the electrical panel room in one corner. It should ideally be very, very clean and free from clutter. Placing the rubber mats is very, very important. There is something called the 11 kV rubber mat, which is shock proof. Adequate PPEs for the people who are working inside the electrical panel rooms is very important. Right, the gum boots, be it the gum boots or the ear mufflers for people working in the compressor rooms. So these are very, very important. Inspecting the panels and equipments periodically as part of the preventive maintenance is important. Maintaining the earth pit in the required frequency. The required frequency is at least once in 2 years. It's always a good practice to do it every year if you have high-end equipments like MRA and CT, PET CT, etc. Measuring the earth resistance is as important, because a lot of short circuits, if it is not measured properly, if it is not maintained properly, there could be a lot of fire hazards that can cause inside the hospital. Maintaining your UPS batteries is important. Dry run the generators. This is very important. As part of your operational maintenance, every day dry run at least for 10 minutes, ideally for 20 minutes. It has to be run before the electrical person begins his work in the department. Maintenance of lift room as per the Lift Act is important. It's again, what are the requirements in the lift room? The inside the lift car, it adequate signages should be displayed on what are the do's and don'ts inside the lift, and whether the communication system is in place, whether you have the emergency light in place, right? The lift room, what are the requirements of the lift room? It should be easily accessible. There should not be any obstacle. There should be a telephone available in the lift room, which is on the terrace. Whether you have the fire extinguishers available in the lift room, the 11 kV rubber mats, whether you have the safety lever, whether the instructions are placed in a manner that the lift boy can understand. So these are very, very important. It very clearly spells out the requirements. The Lift Act very clearly gives us on what are the requirements inside the lift car as well as in the lift room. So these are mandatory. Stick appropriate information inside the lift car on whom to contact, all these do's and don'ts given by the lift car. And diesel stock should also be maintained for at least 2 days. No, I mean, not less than 2 days. So it's important that we have adequate backup. Manifold area. What is a manifold area? It is an area used for storing the medical gas cylinders. A pipeline is used to deliver medical gas from the cylinders to different areas of the hospital. Trust me, there are a lot, every single point in the medical gas area has been given a lot of weightage when it comes to assessment. Of course, not only as part of the assessment, it is definitely a very, very high risk area which needs to be really taken care of. Right, and the construction of the medical gas installations should be as per the norms. Here we are talking about the manifold area. How should these cylinders be placed? There should be a segregation of full and empty cylinders, and labeling of these cylinders is very, very important. Before that, appropriate signages on entry restriction. Anybody should not be able to walk inside the department and just turn off the valve. Probably that would cut down the supply of the medical gas to the various areas, which could even be OT and critical care areas like ICU. So which could be disastrous for a hospital. So entry restriction is very, very important. No smoking boards, right? No smoking policy boards should be displayed, and it should be again clutter free, right? It should be very clean, and all the documents have to be very clearly maintained. Segregation of the empty and full cylinders with appropriate signages have to be there, and it should be chained or restrained with appropriate bars. It should not fall. There has been a lot of incidents where even recently in one of the medical colleges, what happened was, there is always a technique on how to shift the medical gas, I mean the cylinder. The person was new, he was not trained, and the screw, near the screw there was a small damage, and when the technician fitted, it just blew like a missile, and the operator's body was torn into two parts, and it just the top portion of the body along with the cylinder was just pushed out 10 buildings apart, and it was thrown away. So that is the disaster that any medical gas could cause, the cylinder could cause. So welding work, any welding work, wherever you have cylinders, it should be placed apart. All these should be taken care of. There could be small leaks in the oxygen cylinders. How do we test it? There are a lot of methods. The traditional method would be the soap test. By applying soap, whether there is a bubble, we can find out whether there is a leak in the oxygen cylinder, right? So we need to keep it apart. So there are a lot of things that we need to, all these can be done only as part of your risk assessment, right? When you do the facility management, these also become part of the checks. Color coding of the medical gas pipelines. There is no standard, color as such. There are a lot of guidelines available, like the HTM guidelines, IS guidelines. A lot of guidelines are available. We can either follow those, or you can follow a standardized color code for your own hospital. Suppose you have multiple blocks inside the hospital, multiple buildings inside the hospital. Make sure that you follow the same color code. Say, suppose you have yellow for oxygen. Across all the buildings, make sure that you have only yellow for oxygen in all the buildings, so that suppose there is a staff who has been transferred from one building to another, that person doesn't make any mistake. So standardization within the hospital is very important. At the same time, when the hospital is going for some painting work or something, make sure that these color codes are again painted in the right color. Often it is left with the normal wall paint. So these are things that we need to look at when we go for facility rounds. Ensure availability of shut-off valves and leak detector alarms. This is very important, especially when there is a fire hazard that is possible. Obtaining license for LMO. If your hospital has a LMO, appropriate license from the authority has to be obtained. There has to be a proper fencing. There has to be firefighting equipments. Appropriate, water facility should be there. PPEs should be made available. All these should be taken care of as given in the norms, right? It is very important for us to store at least for 2 days. Preventive maintenance of electrical equipment is very important. Uninterrupted supply of medical gas, purity certificates, all these are very, very important. When we talk about the backup equipments, it could be the DG, it could be the UPS, which is connected to all your critical care equipments. Testing of those alternate equipments is again important. And if you are going to outsource it, if you are going to give it as AMC, all those documents needs to be very, very carefully maintained in the hospital. Right. Coming to the last standard, the organization has plans for fire and non-fire emergencies within the facilities. So here, the organization has plans and provision for detection, abatement, and containment of fire and non-fire emergencies. When we talk about the plans, it talks about the actual methodology on how we are going to handle it, how we are going to prevent all these aspects. We talk about fire, for example. So in case of fire, what are we going to do? We are going to handle with the fire extinguisher. Okay, what if it doesn't get contained? What is the next? Suppose your dialysis gets caught. If there is fire in the dialysis department, you're not able to extinguish using the fire extinguisher. What next? People should be taught on how to evacuate the patients to the close by. What if there is fire in the OT while the surgery is still happening? What are we going to do? Do we have any other operation theater where it is, where there is no fire? Are we going to shift there? Or are there any nearby hospitals where we are going to shift the patient and get the surgery fulfilled? So who takes the decision? Who is the incident commander, right, in case of fire? So these things should be very, very clearly written as part of a plan, right? So who's the incident commander? Who does what? What is partial evacuation? What is complete evacuation? Where does it lead to? Where people have to be evacuated? Where they have to gather? All these should be very, very clearly written as part of the plan. Provision also is equally important. It is nice to have plan, but if you don't have adequate equipment like the fire alarms, like the fire extinguishers, your hydrants, your stretchers for shifting, you don't have the provisions to shift the patient, you don't have adequate turnaround space to all these provisions also must be very, very carefully provided. These must be ensured for safe exit of patients at times of emergencies. So this is about fire. Non-fire emergencies, it's always, people always think about earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, which are very, very rare, very, very rare. How frequently are we going to get bomb threats and terrorist attacks in our hospital? May not be. Suppose if your hospital is surrounded by a lot of trees and it is in between a lot of nature. So what could be a non-fire emergency? It could be a snake walking inside your, getting inside your ward, or suppose your hospital is placed near the shore, seashore. There could be flood. If it is nearby a lake, there could be flood emergency possible. If you have a fire flyover near close to your hospital, there could be a collapse. So what is more possible for your hospital? For those non-fire emergencies, we need to have proper plans in place on how we are going to manage such emergencies. It's very, very important. We need not have hundreds of non-fire emergencies. We need not copy paste from some other hospital. We need to customize based on our own requirements. FMS 4B says the organization has a documented safe exit plan in case of fire and non-fire emergencies. Here again, how are we going to evacuate, right? How are we going to display the signages so that it leads the patients, visitors, and the staff to a safe area, which is the assembly point, right? Whether suppose there is a smoke engulfed in the entire area, whether we have the emergency exit boards available close to the floor, whether even while crawling, whether they are able to visualize the emergency exit boards, whether your emergency exit passages, your staircases are free of obstacles. Often we try to dump all these old cupboards and bureaus and old suction apparatus close to the emergency exits, whether it is locked. Even if it is locked, whether the keys are accessible. All these needs to be very, very clearly planned and periodically checked also. Whether the lighting is available in your emergency exits, even if the power fails, whether the lighting is available, whether it is connected to the UPS, all these needs to be very clearly monitored periodically. Whether your fire escape route, I am here. That board is available in tricky areas where there are multiple turns and bends. Patients should be able to use those boards and evacuate on their own as well, right? So these are very important in terms of implementation. We've already seen that there is a maintenance plan for medical gas and vacuum systems. It could be either be done in-house or it could be done externally as well. Proper records on maintenance of these also needs to be maintained properly in the hospital. Mock drills are held at least twice in a year. What are mock drills? People have the myth that we need to beautifully, have a photo shoot or have a video recording of mock drill. What is a mock drill? It is a surprise way of testing whether we are prepared for any emergency, not just the fire, even any other emergency. Often when do we test? We normally test it during the daytime. What is the ideal time to test it? It could be on a Sunday where you have a skeletal staff, or during the nights, because most often all these disasters also happen during the nights, isn't it? So mock drills should not be announced, pre-announced. People will already be ready with full makeup and all. So that is not the mock drill. Mock drill, you do it surprising with just announce it and just monitor unbiased to check out whether the resources are available, whether people who are trained are able to manage the show independently on their own, what is the hustle happening. All these should be documented very clearly. All these deviations should be reviewed, whether the paging system is working, whether the speaker system is, if the speakers are audible, whether the person who's paging is able to, convey it properly, whether the codes that are paged. Codes are not mandatory as per the NABH, but it is always a good practice to have the codes, but you can also have alternate methods of announcements and communication during the time of any emergency. So all these deviations should be monitored as part of the mock drill deviation chart, and actions should be taken. People whom you find are not adequately trained should be again trained, and again, it should not be a traditional way of doing a training using the PowerPoint presentation. There should be tabletop exercises. There should be role plays conducted on whose role is what. Suppose there is a fire inside this auditorium. What is the role as a medical gas technician? What is your role as a security officer? Like this, we need to make them speak, and it should be like a role play more than kind of a PPT presentation. So these should be reviewed periodically and made sure that the hospital is prepared at any point of time, not just for the sake of NABH or for the piece of certificate. So ensuring availability of smoke detectors, alarms, and other mechanisms. These are not mandatory for all hospitals, but National Building Code very clearly Part 4 clearly gives what is required based on the length of the corridor, based on the volume, based on the height of the building, which are the equipments that are mandatory as part of the fire safety. Using emergency codes to alert others, performing the mock drills, assessing the staff response, all these we have discussed. So safe evacuation, displaying the emergency floor plan and emergency exit signages are very important. Ensuring availability of emergency lights, mark the assembly points. People should be aware of where are the assembly points in different locations inside the hospital. Use established evacuation methods. We can always borrow wisdom, but we cannot typically copy from any other hospital. It should be customized and tailored for your own hospital. Keep emergency exits clear and open as already indicated. Identify alternate areas for partial evacuation in case there is a failure. Fire systems should be maintained and tested periodically. Staff should be trained again, and there should be a multidisciplinary team to periodically review and keep changing the protocols as required from time to time. So what is important? Protocols, corrective preventive actions. When you find any deviation in the mock drills, analyze the variations, implement those through a proper training, and periodically keep changing your plans based on the requirement. With that, we come to the end of the session. Happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Madam Sudha. That was a very elaborative and very knowledgeable session. I'm sure the participants enjoyed it. Before we move on to the Q&A session, let me tell the participants that this presentation and the video link shall be mailed to all of you. You will be receiving this. So, ma'am, I'll just read out some of the questions said by asked by our participants. So, yes. Shweta Sharma has asked, in a SHCO, who can be nominated as a safety officer?
Yes, the chapter ROM very clearly talks about designating a safety officer and a quality officer. You need not recruit a safety officer or a quality officer. Who can be a safety officer? Anybody who is interested, anybody who is aware of the overall safety aspect of the hospital, who is trainable, can be a safety officer. Or if you do not want to dump everything on one single person, as I already said, it could be multiple people. Probably the HIC part can be given to the HIC person. The fire safety can be given to people who are relevant to these topics, right? Hope I answered the question.
Yeah. And again, Shweta has asked, what all needs to be monitored in the records for checking and testing alternative sources of water, electricity in an SHCO?
Probably what could be the alternate source for water? If you have an MOU with the external person, probably the water supplier, that should suffice. For alternate testing methods, say for example, you have the alternate sources as a DG, you have the UPS, whether you have the proper preventive maintenance and calibration schedule for these, whether you are able to test it periodically, these records must be maintained as part of the preventive maintenance and calibration schedule.
Dr. Barnalison has asked, what is earth resistance and how do we measure it?
That is part of the electrical safety team. Normally, the licensing department does it. So there has to be measurement of the earth. That is very important for us to evaluate whether the electrical safety is ensured, the power load can be taken, whether it is adequate. All these things are done by the electrical safety. That is done periodically by the electrical department. Is dry run of
generators? Dry run of generators essential? If so, why?
Absolutely. Every day the dry run is important, at least for 10 to 15 minutes, because suppose you don't check it suddenly. Normally, even our two-wheelers, when we don't use it, at least we try to kickstart every day and keep it, so that someday when you actually want to use it, it doesn't get started, isn't it? So it is very important for us to just start it every day, at least for 10 minutes, so that on the day when you require, it doesn't create any trouble, right?
And Ujeshni has asked, is there any fireproof lift, and does NABH approve such hospitals who doesn't have a ramp?
Yeah, NABH does not demand ramp as such. They are not prescriptive about the ramp. It's a requirement of the National Building Code. It depends on the area of your hospital. It depends on the height of the building. Accordingly, the National Building Code very clearly gives the requirements for ramp. I think fire safety lifts, I'm not sure. I think all the lifts are fireproof, and we have to get covered under the insurance as well.
Yeah, the fireproof lift, it is available, but it cannot be used by the occupants of the hospital. It is meant for the firemen to move to that prescribed flow where the fire has broken out. So that is called a fireproof lift. So it is available in the market actually.
Right.
And from Satish Tarale, can you explain about colors of fire safety boards like fire exits, floor map, and assembly point?
Right. These are mandated by the National Building Codes. The emergency exit boards, we do no longer have the fire exit boards. We call it as the emergency exit boards. These are to be green in color, 15 by 21 in measurement, and it should be reflector board, and it should be bilingual. These are the basic requirements for an emergency exit board. Any other board which deals with the fire hazard, it could be the fire alarm, it could be the hydrant, it could be the fire extinguisher, or anything that is pertaining to fire related equipment or fire relating gadget, those should be reflected in red color. It should again be a reflector red board available. This is primarily for us to indicate, and in case there is smoke, these reflector boards will help us to identify even beyond the smoke. That is the intent.
Just one last question from me, actually. In a SHCO, what will be the role of, because you do not find specific department heads like an electrical head or a electrical department head or a fire department head or a fire safety officer. So what is the role of the quality professional there, and what is the role of the management there?
Very, very important, sir. As you rightly pointed out, this entry level is not for hospitals in the metropolitans and other areas. It also covers rural areas where, as you rightly pointed out, it could be a very small hospital. It could be a nursing home type of a SHCO where you don't even have a qualified maintenance manager. In that, at that point of time, it is very essential that somebody who is taken care of who is taken in charge as a quality, understands the seriousness of all these fire safety related and the maintenance part as well, which is why a lot of programs like the CPQH are all introduced through the CAHO. People who are interested, who acquire knowledge through these forums will be able to much handle, and it is the responsibility of the quality person to make the management understand on the importance of these aspects. That is very, very important. And as already said, the intent on why these standards are given has to be understood in the right manner, rather than just blindly going ahead with the standard and documenting it. It is not. It is more for our own hospital than for the assessor or for the assessment part as such.
Very true. And one last question: what if the power goes off during a procedure and the patient is undergoing a major surgery like craniotomy? In that case, how viable will it be to shift the patient from the ongoing procedure table to other theater?
Right. So there are 3 types of managing a fire, as I already said. One could be a small fire which can be managed with a fire extinguisher. The second type could be a small fire inside a small room. It could be an operation theater, it could be a dialysis, it could be an ICU. Say in this case, for example, an operation theater. Suppose the patient is undergoing a cardiac surgery. The patient is already opened, and midway there is fire incident. So do we have time for the surgeon to close? No, may not be possible. In that case, all we have to do is just cover the patient with a towel and shift the patient to the nearest operation theater. If you have another theater which is fire free inside your hospital, or any nearest hospital where you can get the patient operated. So this is much, much better than allowing the patient to face the smoke and everybody dying inside the hospital, inside the operating theater. So these incidents, the incident commanding is very, very important at all these places. Who takes the command? Whether it is the surgeon or the anesthetist, often there could be a conflict there at those times, which is why proper plan and proper definition of these protocols have to be done well ahead in concurrence with the multidisciplinary team. And people have to be taught in such situation who takes the call, who becomes the incident commander. And this is what the instruction would be, and they have to blindfoldly follow those. Did I answer your question, sir?
Yeah, yes. So thank you very much again, Mrs. Sudha Srinivasan, for a wonderful presentation today. I think you impressed the participants. There were a lot of comments in the chat box that it was a wonderful presentation.